I sifted through the sands of time, past, present, and future. I broke the hourglass because time cannot keep itself. And when the last fraction of a minute completes the hour, we just flip it, start over, and then wonder, why is history repeating itself? So harmony is a blip in the timeline, and our reality is devastation. I'm devastated to relay that I sifted through the sands of time, past, present, and future. I voyaged timelines and alternate lives, and Black people were not graced freedom in any of them. I visited entire worlds where religions happily coexisted, where genders weren't listed as markers of capability, where species were sexually safe and free, and there was no incident of harm and no shame in sexuality. But in all of those realities, there was still a hidden actuality that Black people are not truly free.
Hello, welcome. So I guess the beginning prompt for these films was looking at imagining futures for Black and brown peoples. And so I've got a few themes I think we're quite interested to unpack collectively. And the first one is actually came from watching your film Akinola. I was thinking a lot about how, for a lot of us, I know my mum did this, she came from the Caribbean, was with a distant relative, and came to the UK, and I was thinking a lot about how a lot of our familial relations, the way that we're carried through displacement, enslavement, is one of very fractured. I was thinking about ideas like community and kinship. I wonder what does that look like in the future? How do we work towards something that feels less estranged? Yeah, so just thoughts on that. I'll let you begin and then.
Just the easy one then. I don't know how to respond, but I think it's interesting you referencing a different generation in your family, because I think ultimately what we were all trying to project comes from a background of what we've all experienced, or what previous generations in our family have experienced, and where we think the futures might sort of lead to. I know for me, a lot of my thought was around the conversation of the Windrush and all that was going on at the time, and how loads of people came over here for industrial migration. So that was the premise for a lot of my film, particularly.
I feel I think it's worth considering that most of us were not born in this country, and so our the various stages that we migrated here or got to live in other countries where we maybe represented the majority as well. I feel the whole thing of I just think minority awareness in the film is really interesting in all of our films, but also particularly in Akinola, is the whole idea of being we're going to be the first to go, and the weight that carries for anyone walking into a space that they have, in the case of the Windrush, been invited to under basically false exploitation. But I just think that's something that we engage with every day and will continue to engage with. And the first Black person to get on Jeff Bezos's giant dick plane. Honestly, I was watching Akinola's film just being it's the giant dick plane, my God. So yeah, I mean, my film's sort of less about,
Giant
I
dicks.
guess, transgenerational giant dick planes, and more about. It's interesting because everyone talks about mine's, their films are in the future mindset today, or maybe like next week. Do you know what I mean? Like when you see that one shot and they're all in masks, I'm like, yeah, that's when we made that film. But I do think that the carrying of transgenerational trauma, whether it's conscious or unconscious, is very real, and it's very heavy.
Some of the thoughts I was having really was around tribalism, and how actually when, although we're Black people, we're all different too, and trying to accept one another is kind of it's something that we don't actually often talk about, and understand that you're from the East and I'm from the West. We do this and we do things in different ways, and so when it comes to that moment, for example, in the film where there's this opportunity for community, they've all been isolated. There's this sort of, it just never happens, and it's kind of indicative of oftentimes when Black people try to collectivize, and I think when we're looking at the future, I feel like what the future, my film, and Courtier's film is trying to do is to really sort of like dig down and get us to think about that. Think about why is that? What is holding us back from each other? The idea of survival, and just how, as Black people, we're constantly having to consider that it's never just okay enough to say, okay, well, I'm just existing. And I think in some ways, I think it's in Elliot's film. Out of all of the films, it was the only one that felt like actually this dystopia that you were talking about, this was a utopia. This is an opportunity for us to see that.
It's also optimism, like resilience is also optimism. It's like having an optimistic outlook in what you're trying to do. And I would just second that for Elliot's film. I think sort of watching it, even though my film's optimistic, I think his film was like definitely optimistic. And I think it kind of referenced a lot of stuff that maybe we already know and take for granted.
Ultimately, for us to survive with climate change, with law enforcement, with all of this sort of stuff, it's going to be through community and resilience and just getting through it together. So that's, I think, what he's trying to encapsulate in that film.
And also, I think it's really important in that film, which I always loved when Elliot first pitched it, is like these teenagers, these young people are feeding their whole block. And so growing and cultivating the land and then being able to kind of feed everyone kind of harks back to kind of our past. You go to my grandma's house, there'll be food, she'll feed everyone. And so it's just like, how do we, it's another sense of community, but also start from basics. We go back to come forward. When I'm at peace is when like you're with your community. And so we shouldn't underestimate that. Like there's a sense of peace I feel when I'm around Black people. There's a sense of peace that I feel when I'm at home. And that sanctuary at home can easily translate to when I'm in my community. And so, part of the reason why I set up Fruit Tree, and it's not just for people of colour, it's for kind of all levels of talent, is to kind of create a safe space. And we need to kind of create that safe space for each other as well. And it's not about kind of saying your film is great when I don't think it's great. I just think it's about kind of being critical but compassionate. Let's set some rules. Your question has to be a question, not a statement. Go on,
Okay, I'm especially proud of all of you. All of you. You've really done really well. And I have to say, when Fiona said, we should come and have a look, I thought,
How dare she?
But honestly, I'm so impressed. I work in secondary school, and recently I've been fortunate enough to work in primary schools. And the primary schools, I'm really proud of what's going on. The children are listening, the children are taking in things, but when they get into secondary school, I don't know what happens. They're absolutely crazy, absolutely crazy. And I'm concerned, obviously, about children full stop, but I'm more concerned as well about black children, you know, and we need to flavor them. We need to grab them and we need to say, this is how you need to be. This is what the world is about, and this is what you need to be. You need to behave yourself. You need to have respect. You need blah, 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 blah. And I think you guys need to take yourselves into the schools.
Auntie, just to make your point, like to address your point, is that we just have to it's not just about us who sit here as well. I think sometimes we can look at the people who are doing the big shiny thing. Do you know what I mean? It's like the examples that we're setting to our next door neighbors, to the, you know, your friend's kids, or the person that lives on your block or lives at the end of the street, you know. And I think we just have to just give a little bit more. You know, when I was growing up in Pecs, you know, big up Peckham, you know, big time. It was the aunties and uncles that I saw, you know, and, you know, I had a dream. I was like, this is what I always wanted to do. And I think those people, although they didn't do what I was doing, or what I wanted to do, sorry, they provided like the right footing because they had the right values, the respect, all the things that Fiona's mentioned already. So it's not just about the roles that we play professionally. It's about how we conduct ourselves and, you know, show up, you know, and I think that's important.
I would also say our other aunties and uncles are Diane Abbott and Dawn Butler and David Lammy, and we need to make sure that those people in government are supported. The other place, you know, that is collective action as well, is the power to vote. You know, we've had a Conservative government for 11 years now. Prevent strategy, which is really what my film's about, and the scrutiny that black and brown kids go through at school and the rate at which they are shopped to the police directly by their teachers is the highest it's ever been. In a pandemic, 5,000 children under the age of 14 were reported to the police. So actually, it is our job, yes, to work in our communities in small levels. And even if you work with one individual child, that's amazing. But it is also our job to get the bastards out. Right, because that will change the life of this country and all young people.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to end there, I'm afraid. I think there was a couple of questions elsewhere, but I think that's all we have for this evening. I want to say thank you to all of you for coming down, just like, giving us your words there and sharing your thoughts.
Just want to say, lastly, just thanks again to the cast and crew and all of those who are in our films, who came down to be in our films during a pandemic. Thanks to the guys at We Are Parable for putting this together as well. And shouts to Film4 as well. For sure.
You know, the graciousness, but also the time, the energy that we spent in one of the hardest years we've ever had. Like, we're really lucky to do this. This was a huge distraction when the whole world was going through strife, but it was so much more difficult. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.